Good day, everybody. I'm Abbott Butt. Glad to be here with you on Hospitality Talks with another wonderful panel of professionals that would share their insights about a topic that is very relevant to where we are today regarding dining and food trends. Well, dining trends have evolved, but at a rather slower pace until the pandemic. Now the industry finds itself in a new era of food service and hospitality, adapting to new demands and challenges. In the age of Food Network, TikTok, and Instagram, consumer expectations and demands are ever changing. Online search trends drive restaurants' offerings as consumers using third party delivery services search for type of menu rather than a specific change. These changes in demands can be overwhelming with new business models surfacing rapidly every day. We are again thrilled to have three wonderful professionals in this field that would help us understand how this particular field has evolved over a period of time. But before we go to our panelists, as always, I'm here with our co host, Sam-Erik Rutman. Sam.
Yes, from my side also, welcome to the show. This is going to be a really cool show talking about food, my favorite topic. And so many things have happened in the last couple of years, and I'm excited to hear what the panel thinks of what are the things that will stick after the pandemic and which will just disappear. So if it's all right, let's bring in the panel. But before that, if you are just watching this for the first time, if you see a comment, if you'd like to place a comment or ask a question from the panelists, just write in the comments and I'll make sure this will be posted on the screen. And if it's for the first time you're watching our episode and you like what we are talking about, then give us a thumbs up and even better, subscribe to the show. So, but let's get started and I will bring everybody to the scene here.
Superb, superb. So wonderful professionals we have with us today, starting out with Daniel Green, who is an internationally known chef, television personality, and award winning author of 12 cookbooks. He's also known as the model cook and a healthy eating expert. And God only knows I have a lot to learn in that area. His simple, healthy eating recipes have been featured on numerous magazines. He has also created menus for hotels around the world, as well as created meals for airlines. Daniel, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me. Can't wait.
We also have with us today TJ Delle Donne, who is Assistant Dean, College of Food Innovations and Technology at my alma mater, Johnson & Wales University. So you know he's going to be a great contributor to this show. And by the way, I'm not biased. He has served as the executive chef of the Flavor Experience Conference for 11 years and continues to be contributing writer and expert for Flavor and the Menu magazine. A certified executive chef through the American Culinary Federation, TJ has been invited to cook all over the world, including the famed James Beard House. Dedicated to his students, TJ works closely with industry partners to ensure quality experiential education and is always encouraging innovation. TJ, thanks for joining us. We have with us also Michael Whiteman, who is the president of Baum Whiteman International Restaurant Consultants. And for those of you who might not know, you will certainly know their creations, particularly two, the world's largest grossing and most magical restaurants in the legendary Windows on the World on top of the World Trade Center, and the Rainbow Room atop Rockefeller Center. I think if you have ever been through New York, you definitely have at least walked by or heard about those two restaurants. Working with bold-faced names in architecture, design, and hospitality, he creates big ideas for diverse section of food industry, from supermarkets to museums, from public parks to drinking bars, and from food courts to rooftop extravaganzas around the globe. Michael, thank you for taking the time.
Good morning.
So, look, we will get started. And Daniel, we're going to start with you. It's been 20 years since your first book. What has changed in that time?
Well, a lot. My whole passion of food has always been about healthy eating. So all I've ever done is I got into this because I had a massive weight loss and started to want to show people how to make food that they were on as a diet enjoyable. But in those days, it was very much the fat-free. It was all about eating high, you could have zero fat, you could have high carbohydrates, you could have pasta, you could have potatoes, but you couldn't touch, say, avocado or oil. So that trend has definitely changed. So that cycle has gone, and it's really a little bit more knowledgeable about good fats. So that's completely different, but I've always had that focus on the health.
So, Daniel, in times of stress, which we've been, at least for the last couple of years, we all tend to gravitate to comfort foods, whether it's mac and cheese, burgers, or I don't know, chicken wings, or whatever the case might be. How do those comfort foods fit with healthy eating?
You certainly can create comfort foods, and I just think we're all a little bit more knowledgeable today than, say, we were 20, 30 years ago, because we followed fads of diets. There was things from the Montignac and Atkins and low fat and fat free. And now I think we know that there are certain fruits and vegetables we can have. There's high protein. We have to have a lower amount of carbohydrates. I think most diets do fall under that, and I think we know that. I think you can really make comfort foods quite well. I think you can do that. And there's a lot of different ingredients out there that are accessible. I mean, things like cauliflower rice and putting them in stews and making those wonderful comfort soups and stews, you can do. And I think, again, the knowledge is there, and we have so much more access to that today.
Well, look, again, in the last couple of years, wellness has become front and center. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody is more conscientious about wellness principles. Talk to us about the role of diets and food relative to wellness. What space does food occupy, and how can we be better knowledgeable about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, firstly, if you talk to anyone in the fitness world, however important that is for cardio workouts and your body, we still know it's about 90% of weight loss is really down to the food you're intaking rather than what you do in the gym. So we know it's key. We know it's important. We know food really is where it starts. And then wellness and health, it's a very interesting one, especially when I started creating menus like 20 years ago, particularly Southeast Asia. A lot of big hotel brands and spas. I remember once going to the Peninsula, Hong Kong, and they called it healthy. And it was just a tiny portion. There was nothing healthy in it. There was cream, there was butter, there was a pasta dish, but it was a tiny portion. So a nutritionalist could dissect that and say, yes, this is actually not that bad. But I think we didn't know what healthy was. I think there's a lot of people that use the word, and still it's very, very broad. I like to think a little bit more about skinny, about how if you think about food, you can make it, you can adapt it to make it something that really is guilt-free. So I've evolved with that. So a lot of my last promotions before COVID in Asia, I was doing guilt-free gourmet at really nice 5-star hotels, and you only really need to tweak it a little bit, and you've really got something that is guilt-free, because it's the carbs which we want to avoid, the gluten, the processed foods. So I think there's lots of options out there. For me, that's what a well-being and a healthy menu looks like. But to other people, it has different connotations.
Well, look, you talk about avoiding processed foods. Fair enough. As a matter of fact, I was listening to a dietitian not too long ago, and her advice was that to the extent possible, if your great grandparents didn't have that food, avoid it because it's been worked and reworked and reworked. But
Yeah.
we all know now plant-based meat is becoming an in thing. Well, isn't that really processed?
Well, it's like saying organic isn't all the same. There are so many different manufacturers and there are so many different people doing it. Again, you've got to go and research who you're buying from, what you're having. There are some very clean products out there. And as you're right, there are some very big mass produced that aren't so great as well. And plant-based is a different kind of a trend that is here, and for very good reasons. And I think we're seeing a lot of it. It's a harder one to follow. I mean, there are certain places, if you live in New York, there's some great restaurants, like ABC Kitchen does an incredible plant-based menu. You could do it yourself, of course. And I think that plant-based is definitely a trend that we're seeing and growing. I think price has got a lot of things for trend in the next decade. I think that's going to change the way we eat a lot. I think the divide is a lot bigger. I think we're seeing expensive restaurants become even more expensive, and the cheaper are more accessible. And the cheaper you go, you do get what you pay for. And unfortunately, when things in a country of this size are mass produced, they really have a lot of rubbish in them. And I think we need to open up the knowledge of that. So maybe I hope there'll be a more middle of the road kind of dining experience that does focus on better ingredients, but still not going to the price you would have to spend for expensive dining.
Well, look, growing up, we were, I can almost remember that the things that didn't taste wonderful, that were meant to be healthy for you. I've always thought that was sort of a myth to get kids to eat something they didn't want to eat. And the things that tasted good, you were supposed to stay away from it. Your
Yeah.
thoughts, please.
Well, I mean, also growing up, things have changed and the brands have changed. So when we used to have orange juice, it was pure orange juice. And you just look at brands that you grew up with and they're very different. So that's a little bit more of a fall into it without us knowing. If you look at the canned sauces that have got sugar in them now that never used to, they're actually the same brand. They've just changed the ingredients because filler is cheap. Corn syrup, starch, sugar is cheap and it goes into it. So I think that's changed a lot on our perception of it. So education, always read the back of a pack and see how things are changed. And that's also, another reason why the paleos and the ketos are good diets in a way, because they do cut away all of the sugar and all of the processed food. And when you do that, you go to natural. Again, going back to my health idea of health in some person's mind is different than health to another. But if it's natural, to me, that's a big step to take. Even if you are having the creams and the butters and the deep fried, if you're having natural food, that's a big step.
Well, Daniel, that's a great segue. And before I turn it over to Sam, just a question about these diets. Aren't they fads in themselves? If we lined up all the books that have been printed about different diets, whether they're Atkins, keto, South Beach, paleo, I think we can go around the globe a few times and still have books left. Talk to us about it. How does a consumer know what to follow? And in many ways, our bodies behave differently to different types of foods. Can you help us understand that?
There's a lot in that. I think there's a lot in where your natural, habitat is and what you're used to and how your stomach will digest and eat other foods. But trends, you are right. I mean, there's 100% because the diet industry is a billion-dollar business plus that we get people onto it because it's so easy. Lose weight in 10 minutes. You're going to drop 50 pounds in a month. You can only do that if you're giving something new. But if you do take a closer look to these diets, they're just reinvented. In the 60s, there was the Twiggy diet. It was all about oranges and it was citrus and meat. Well, that came back 20, 30 years later as Atkins, meat, any kind of protein, zero vegetables, nothing. Then we got more into paleo, which was no, meat is good for that, but then there's a different kind of thing we need to do is add vegetables and fruit and take away some other things. Same with kind of the other diets out there. They are a reinvention. Even Montignac was a reinvention of Atkins. We will see that. I think there are some things that work. You can put people on a diet and they can have literally anything. And if they eat the same thing every day, they get bored of it and they don't overeat, and then they control themselves and they lose weight. So it doesn't necessarily mean what the food is and why they're losing weight. But again, back to my point, I think we are knowledgeable now. We all know that lean meats are better for us, not processed food. Get that out of the way. Sugar's not good for us. Carbohydrates, maybe in moderation, having more in the morning than the evening. And I think what I'm saying there in a nutshell is certainly all of us know that today because there's a different kind of communication and a lot more doctors that have been vocal on the kind of modified Mediterranean diet, which also fits into a lot of paleo. So I think that's there. I think keto, personally, it does work for certain medical conditions. That's how it was evolved for epilepsy. But I do think we'll look at that and think maybe that was a bit of a fad, having the butter in your coffee and the cheese and the high fat. I think we might tweak that. But I do think more the paleo is something that is going to be long term.
Well, Daniel, it's if you look at the blue zones around the world, the centenarians, apart from their lifestyle and the social support network, the food has been very, very, very important. And most of the time, from what I understand, they have relied on natural foods and in all those ingredients sort of in moderation. I would like to better understand why go to these labeled trends as opposed to combination of these ingredients in moderation.
1,000%. 1,000%. Depends where you live, though, right? If you go to Paris and you have a 4-course meal, it's tiny little portions, and you're completely right. That's probably not going to do any damage at all. You're in Japan, you don't see overindulging. You do see lifestyle change, like Malaysia, with a lot more kids going to air-conditioned shopping malls, which becomes a lot more like the West compared to places like Vietnam and Thailand. But you're 100% right, but in the West, we overindulge. You see the adverts on TV in the US and the size portions are massive and our stomachs grow and we get used to that and we think that's good value. So that I don't think will change. I think value here is a perception on how much you get, and in other parts of the world it isn't. If we can go back to balanced meals, we don't need to ever think of a trend. You're 100% right. But on the other flip side, I think here in the US, even in the UK, which has got similar trends, we do eat too much. And that's the push to have to then control it by going on these diets.
So at the end of the day, it's a balance between caloric intake and what you burn, and net, if you want to gain, it's got to be surplus. If you want to lose, it's got to be a deficit. Let me hand it over to Sam, Daniel, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Sam.
Well, thank you. Daniel, I have to admit, I heard about you, but we have never met. But one thing I remember from one of your, it must be a TV show, that you were making bibimbap, I mean that Korean dish. And I was so impressed about that, how you actually, because bibimbap is one of my favorite dishes from the time I lived in and worked in Korea, but how you actually brought it a little bit more to a palate of the Westerner. And I think that was brilliantly done. So I just want to congratulate you. I was very impressed about that. That's all I can say. But I have a little bit of a question also. And the question is now that I'm part of a think tank which talks about hospitality of the future. And now we have people who are, when they talk about food and beverage or dining, there's that advocacy about heirloom seeds and supporting the system where the vegetable and fruits are pollinated or pollinated by birds. So we're going back to that kind of natural state that you really have a better control of the origin of those fruits and so on. Is that something that you think that, for instance, if you're looking at the way things are in the United States, that there is a chance for this to develop? Because in fact, if you know the traits and the origin of what this fruit or vegetable is, then actually you have a chance to get much of a better, more nutrition-rich tomato, for instance, like brandywine tomato, which is very difficult to grow.
Interesting. I think there's a lot. To your first question, thank you so much on that with the Korean dish. I mean, I think whenever I make something, I try to create things where you don't have that many ingredients that you're foreign to. So yes, you pull away a little bit from the original, but you do want to make sure it's accessible. Otherwise, no one's going to make it. So if you do a dish which is like a complete traditional pad thai, it's going to be a little hard for anyone to really get those ingredients. So try to do that. Back to foods and how it's grown and the source of it. I do think there is a huge audience that want to know that, do follow it. There's a huge audience that want line caught. They don't want farm bred animals and fish. There's a lot of that, and we have to be very dedicated. And price is such a big factor of it because it is expensive to be able to go down that road of eating things with such a great natural source. It's a very expensive process. I wish there was a balance. I wish there was something that could bring in a much more accessible way to have farm food, natural, delivered. So I don't know where that will go. I'm not sure. There definitely is a younger generation that is more plant-based orientated, and they have that thought process. I hope they carry that forward. But again, it's all that education, isn't it? It's all that knowledge of things, because most people just don't think that much about it. They go and they buy food, they trust manufacturers, they trust what's out there, and it isn't as simple as that. It's a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at the hotels and what is being happening in the industry, I try to look what is the next generation, the generation Z. What are they? What do they care about? And then they want to trust who is the manufacturer. They want to trust the food they are eating. And so I have a feeling that maybe there's a way how, even though it's going to be an expensive process, but I think that people want to have a better control what they are eating, and maybe this is the way how this will evolve at least a little bit. I know that unfortunately there's also that price divide because it's a very expensive way of growing things. But from the people I talk to who are in that generation who says in 10 years, I have the purchasing power. I'm making sure I want to have a better control what I enjoy and what's the actual source from.
Yeah, I think there's a huge gap there.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any other questions because I think there's a lot of things that I just will jump into some of the comments maybe later on. So back to you, Abid.
And just to tell Michael that I once ate, I remember my first dining experience at Windows of the World. I was taken by our very close family friends about 40 years ago. I still remember it. Brilliant experience. Thank you, Michael.
Well, cherish the memory because, of course, it no longer exists.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think Mike.
Sorry, Daniel. I was asking a question that might not be fair for me to ask you about the celebrity chef syndrome in the food culture. We've got lots of celebrities around the globe. In what influence do these personalities have on how people view what foods are available?
It's interesting. I got in at the very beginning of that, when I saw that evolve. I think if you have someone that really has a passion on what they do and they really are true to what they do, like I'm not trying to create Michelin star meals. I'm trying to create kind of really nice dining experience where you're taking a lot of, food away that's bad and you're kind of compromising a little and making something that's true to a diet. If you follow a lot of the celebrity chefs that really have a passion, if you follow someone that does Thai food or Chinese and they've got that dedication, you get so much more out of that. But it is entertainment. So a lot of times, it's a very fast pace. It's something that happens very quickly, which isn't your experience at home. So what we see sometimes on TV is definitely different than the real aspect of it. And a lot of it is just watching it. Food Network has definitely got an audience that don't make the food. They watch it because it's entertaining. So I think there's a big gap there. I think there is some incredible talent that's never on TV that is the real talent of food. And there's people that entertain and just show people a few things they've never known. So tips is always the biggest part of that, if that answers the question.
Well, fair enough. I mean, I think food networks of the world have created more gourmands in this day that we might have ever seen. everybody seems to have an opinion about it, and that's good enough. It's a rising tide syndrome, I guess we all learn. Michael, thank you. Sorry, Daniel, thank you for being with us. Please stay with us. We'll be right back with you. But at this point, Sam, if it's okay, let's bring TJ to the front. TJ, thanks for being with us.
You're very welcome, and I apologize if there's any delay here. I'm trying to close as many programs as I can to make sure that we're not having a little bit of a delay. But thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And Daniel, thank you for all of your remarks. That was fantastic. And just to touch on your last point there, this is about the closest to TV as I'm going to get. So we'll just make that known.
Well, TJ, your background is fascinating. I wish I was in Providence with you with all those bottles of wine behind you. So, are you in one of the labs?
Yes, we're actually in lab today. We don't typically go to class on Fridays only because we like to have our students work as much as possible. I mean, Providence and our satellite campus, our branch in Charlotte, is just a bustling food city. And Fridays and Saturdays, we know it's busy, so we want to make sure that the students are doing work outside of the classroom. So we don't typically go to class on Fridays, but we're here today only because we had a little bit of a delayed start due to the Omicron.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So let's get right into it. Talk a little bit about the food philosophy from your point of view. How do you define it? What is kind of the right or wrong or indifferent? What are you imparting in the future celebrity chefs, if I may use that terminology?
Sure. I like to, and I'll piggyback on a few things that Daniel was saying also, that, if as an analog, if I had my students, I tell them if they were studying cardiology at Brown University or if they were studying music up at Berkeley in Boston, it would be incumbent on them to study other musicians or other medical doctors. So I don't see much of a difference here when we're studying food at Johnson & Wales University. I think it's important that they're not only listening to what their faculty members and their chairs and their deans have to say, but their peers, and studying philosophy. I remember being in school myself at the French Laundry. It was doctrine. If you didn't have that book, we didn't have social media back then, but if you didn't have that book and you weren't really reading what Thomas Keller was doing or trying to understand what his food philosophy was, which is still tried and true, I think it's still he's still one of the best chefs in the history has seen. I think that's important. I think it's important for students to study those things. I tell them being a copycat isn't really a good thing, right? I don't think, in music or in fashion or in anything else, in any other art form, I don't think you really want to copy other people's work, but you want to be inspired by their work. You want to be influenced by their work. And I think it's studying, it's philosophy. And I think that we've gotten to a point now in gastronomy, at least here in the United States, that there's enough out there for us to study. Historically, it's Escoffier, it's Carême, right? We still, and everyone asks me, I'm Italian, but everyone asks me why we teach French, French cuisine. Why is that the bedrock and to which our curriculum is built? And that's because they were, they wrote it down. They wrote it down in a way that made sense, that was in print, right, in the early 20th century. So that philosophy is important. I think in the makings of a chef, not only in your skill, not only in your, the flavors you're able to put together, but I think in the message and the advocacy that the people watch us. People really do. And when they come out to our restaurant, it's like buying tickets to see a show. So they expect that we're not only feeding them for sustenance, but we're sourcing responsibly and being healthy, to all of Daniel's points.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Hey, you talking about Escoffier and everybody in between to where we are today, and possibly the techniques that go into cooking are a lot different. Have the fundamental principles of cooking stayed the same, or have we evolved? Certainly when I went to culinary school, what was being taught then, I think I wouldn't be able to pass a single course.
Yeah, it's that's a great question, and we struggle with that. I think a little bit, and not struggle, but we have students that come through that are a little bit more inquisitive, right? We all have a computer in our pocket, right? I'll hold up my phone. We don't discourage inquiry, right? That's higher education, right? We shouldn't be do as I say. It should be, it's problem based learning or project based learning. We should be solving, for those inquiries, and we encourage that. So, but we'll have students that come to, I want to spherificate this, I want to sous vide that. That's fine, and we'll get there, but we have to teach fundamentals and the techniques of yesteryear, that are still tried and true. I use that term again. It's important. I think delta T, right? Controlling temperature, whether it be with open flame, whether it be with electricity, whether it be with radiation, whether that be with induction, whether that be with immersion circulators, we're still using heat, that element, to change food, right? To make food palatable, to digestible, all those things. We still need to learn that. We still need to learn how connective tissue breaks down in the braising or the stewing process, and cooking methods, from your dry cooking methods to your wet cooking methods to your combination cooking methods. Those are still incredibly important to master and to understand, because they're never going to change. All of that, those techniques are never going away. Of course, we can fold in technology, right? We're the College of Food Innovation and Technology, so we're very open to working with partners like Rational, Polyscience, and the technology that goes into all of these equipment, all companies, if you will. But it's still about controlling temperature. It's still about using delta T as an ingredient in your recipe. That the technology, of course, assists with that. It helps us with that. It brings efficiencies to the process, but it certainly doesn't change the process.
So, TJ, the cooking equipment has come a long, long, long ways, from open flames and earthenware ovens, if you would, to of science and alchemy controlled to the absolute T. But
Mm.
talk about some of the recent innovations. Now I understand robotics are coming in. So at this day and age, if I am looking to be an aspiring chef, would I really go down this path? Because I'm going to be replaced with a robotic arm that can cook absolute perfection every single time with the
Right.
exact ingredients that you program. Do I really want to go down this path, or is it a losing battle?
That's right. That's a great question, and I'm sure this is something that all of us on this panel, and everyone listening, I'm sure these are things we think about all the time. Are our jobs secure? Will technology, not infiltrate? That's the wrong word, but will it get to a point where maybe the human resource is taken out of, out of the restaurant? And here's my answer to that, and I'm sure everyone has their own opinion. What we do, right? What chefs do is one of the last romantic, jobs, careers, right? What we do, it's very tangible. What we do with our hands. Again, I think it's something that it's sought after. I think people want to experience our creativity. They want to experience our flavor combinations. They want to experience our technique. They want to experience our menus. I just don't think that taking that human element out of the restaurant or out of food service in across the board is going to give the guest that experience now, yesterday, or tomorrow. I just don't see it. Yes, there's an argument that you can use AI and we can input the computers to do what we want, and that's fine. I think there's an argument to be had about consistency, right? I think many restaurants have built empires on consistency. I won't name them, but I think that's the name of the game, right? Any chef is going to say, I want this dish to be exactly the same every time that customer comes back. And that human resource is the one thing that inhibits consistency. So if I can have a robot that makes a pizza, or a robot that makes a salad, or flips an omelet, or makes a stir fry bowl perfect every single time, I think there's a market for that in a QSR or in a QSR plus scenario. But as far as I don't think there'll be Michelin star restaurants with robots, is what, that's what I'm trying to say. I think that there's still a romance to what we do. I still think that people seek out the human element, and chefs still have a major role to play in that.
Well, look, I totally agree, and I must confess I'm biased to it. The personality behind the food, the white jacket, what you're wearing, I think it's fascinating to talk to those people when you go to a restaurant, and a lot of what gets consumed is with that personality. So let me hand you over to Sam-Erik, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Sam.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. TJ, very interesting point of view that you are making here about where the culinary is going, and the roots of it. I would like to ask you just your feedback or comment on the students and the students who are joining the school. What are their aspirations commonly, and and the second part is, have you found that there's still the burning passion to learn the trade, or is it something that they're looking for easier jobs where they don't have to spend so much time and long hours?
Thank you, Sam-Erik. I appreciate that. And I think that that's a question, as an Institute of Higher Education, we ask ourselves almost daily. What is our customer looking for? What does our customer want? As we made this evolution from the College of Culinary Arts to the College of Food Innovation and Technology, we felt it imperative that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I hate to use that euphemism, but we will always at Johnson Wales University create the world's best chefs. We will always create the world's best pastry chefs. That is something that we've done for 50 years, since the early 70s. And we've graduated the likes of Emeril Lagasse, Tyler Florence, Graham Elliott, Chris Cosentino, and the list goes on and on and on. With that alumni base, with our reputation being a tower in culinary education, we still get droves of students that want to follow in that path. And we have the programming, we have the facilities, we have the faculty, we have the technology, and the curriculum to do that. And it's reflective in our programs. That being said, Johnson & Wales Culinary Institute of America, Le Cordon Bleu, these were institutions that were all in a competitive market in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then we saw the Food Network boom, right? When we saw this thing balloon, it was this bubble. And at one time, there were 30, 40, 50 institutions conferring degrees in culinary arts. And then there were 900 to thousands to 1,500. It was inevitable that the levee was going to collapse a little bit there. And it did. And I think that we saw that with a lot of schools closing. And I don't want to belabor that, and I don't want to go down that path, but we felt that it was important at Johnson & Wales University that we diversify our portfolio, leverage our reputation in food, and offer programming to across many other disciplines. So we're seeing our students matriculate in culinary nutrition. A culinary nutrition graduate now would be a personal chef for professional athletes, NC2A athletes, performance chefs. We're seeing them at Manchester United. We're seeing the University of Alabama's football program, Clemson's football program, the Patriots, the Bruins, the Red Sox right here in Boston. All of those team chefs are Johnson Wales graduates. Culinary science, which is the nexus of food science and culinary arts and product development. We're seeing a huge surge in that market, and our graduates are at Kraft Heinz or PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, Land O'Lakes, Nestle, large companies like that coming out of those programs. We have a program in sustainable food systems, looking at the food system at large, really leveraging again, I said the advocacy. Students really care. And again, to Daniel's point, students really care about food. They care about where their food comes from. How can we graduate a student that can affect change on the food system at large, the larger supply chain, growing, so on and so forth. So we have a very, very robust sustainable food systems degree, food and beverage entrepreneurship. We want to breed business owners. We want to breed those, students that want their own business or fleet of businesses. What's the last degree? Dietetics, right? We clinical situations, right? And to Daniel's point, health is very, very important to Americans, at least, that we want to, teach our students, and that food, I don't want to say food is medicine. That's kind of an overused terminology, but that what we do ingest, what we put inside of our bodies, has direct effect on our health. And our dietetics and applied nutrition students are certainly learning that. And most of these students go on to be registered dietitians and work in clinical settings.
Well, fantastic. I mean, I'm really impressed when you talk about the culinary nutritionist and culinary science and all etc. So that is I was really seeking that, because there are so many different students and different people who enter the industry have so different ambitions. So that is really outstanding. Thinking about the baby boomers and so people, the senior living, in one show that we had, we talked about one of the hotel colleges that they have a program for management, not in hotel management, but management in senior living. I'm just wondering, off the cuff, does that relate to what you're doing in terms of the culinary? Is there some particular aspect of someone who actually want to contribute into that part of the industry, and what should they study, and what programs should they get into?
Sure. That's a great question. Dietetics, applied nutrition, and again, if they want to work in these facilities in a clinical setting, we have programs for that. But I think culinary nutrition, right? We put the food back in nutrition, right? These are all students that are matriculated, and we have a common first year. Every single student starts on the cutting board, no matter what program they're in, right? We want to build an affinity for food. We want to build this love of food at this kind of grassroots level, right? Every clove of garlic, every stalk of celery. That's very important to us. So a culinary nutrition graduate would be a perfect fit. And we just had Compass Group here Tuesday, and Morrison, which is their healthcare division. They hire a ton of our students, and not just Morrison, but Aramark, Sodexo's across the board. And our students are to one of your questions and points earlier, that these jobs tend to be a little bit better paying. Those jobs tend to have a little bit more of a quality of life, meaning they can work a 40-hour week, more of a daytime shift. So it's very attractive. Our students are in culinary nutrition, even culinary arts, are very marketable to these the senior living or rehabilitation type centers.
All right. Well, TJ, thank you very much for those answers, and I will hand over back to Abid.
Thank you. TJ, one last question before we bring our next guest forward. Talk about evolution and convergence of flavors from around the world. At one point, it was all about the purists, that if it's Italian, it's got to be ABC, or if it's Chinese, it's got to be this. More and more and more that the flavors are converging, and people are testing with different herbs and spices. Your thoughts in how does that play into future trends?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I always wondered. So when we say Thai cuisine, or we say Korean, or we say Chinese or Italian, I always wonder what folks in the in other countries say about American cuisine. I always wonder, like, I'm going to put an American flair on this. I always wondered that. It's always funny. I just don't know if in certain areas of this country, I'm sure we can put our thumb on some what's traditional American cuisine. But I think I think there's a supply chain and just social media and all, just opening the world up a little bit has allowed us to open up ourselves and what we and what we tend to gravitate toward as far as what we like and what we would consume. So I think that we've created this global pantry, which I like to tell my students, and that that our palate in this country in particular has grown and has evolved so much from years past. Even my parents, what we see even in retail, as far as flavors. Just look what Lay's puts on their potato chips. I just think that the palate has grown so much, and which has invited a ton of international, I guess, synergies, right? We can, the gochujang and the sriracha, and those were all things that chefs were playing with in the fine dining world, and we said, oh, and then those trends and those flavor profiles tend to trickle down into the casual dining, or into QSR, into even retail. So I think that now that's changed consumer demand, and I think that consumers even expect those flavors and expect what's next. So I think it's important. I think this conversation about food trends is important. I don't think we got to get up and chase every single trend or every fad that comes through. But I think if we can read between the lines and say, hey, what's got some lasting power here as far as cuisine? I think that this, we used to call it a melting pot in this country. I like to think of it more of a cultural mosaic. You can go to any four corners of the United States and get some really authentic food. International food. Think it's San Francisco, Little Havana, and Miami. So you can really we have evolved, I think, as a ton, at least
Fabulous.
Americans. So that's what I think, and I think that it's exciting for students moving forward, that they can get a little bit of work outside the meat and potatoes realm.
Fabulous. Well, TJ, thank you so much. Please stay with us. We'll have you back. But let's bring Michael forward. Michael, thank you for taking the time. And to echo what Daniel said, I have very, very fond memories from my younger days when I was working at Windows in the World, and a fabulous creation that you guys did. So thanks for being with us.
Well, the saying about Windows on the World when you first worked there was, it shows what God would do if he had enough money. Yeah,
I,
you
I
have to
think
remember.
that saying holds true across the board, even today.
Yeah, but you have to remember in 1975 we spent $26 million building it.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it wasn't our money; it was your money.
And boy, I tell you, I think that place paid back in spades. So, Michael, talk about changes in operating models over the last decade. People are habits, consumer habits have evolved. Of course, the industry is having to change. There are new concepts in. So, talk about some of the changes in operating models in restaurants from the time that Windows in the World, with multiple different concepts in one space, to where we are today.
Um, if you focus on just the hotel world, which I think this is the subject we're supposed to be discussing, if you focus just on the hotel world, we find the same challenges in developing a food and beverage program for a hotel, because uh, one dining space is not sufficient. Um, and the notion that you should never eat dinner in a place where you have breakfast uh, demands that people staying in hotels eat their breakfast in one place and their dinner in another. So no matter what things were before COVID or 10 years ago and what they are now, you still have a hotel with multiple dining spaces that need to be individually merchandised and individually identified. I think the big difference between the operating model of, say, 15 years ago and today uh, is the extreme effort by many hotel companies to offload their food and beverage problems onto celebrity chefs who um, get a very good economic deal uh, in return for which they, in theory, invite a broader audience to the hotel. Uh, and the hotel ends up losing about the same amount of money it did when it was badly running its own food and beverage.
So, look, certainly there has been a trend going towards the celebrity chefs, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But the other challenge, because of the consumer demands, talk to us a little bit about the average lifespan of a restaurant. The hotels are competing with freestanding independent restaurants. Freestanding restaurants possibly had some liberties that the restaurants and the hotels don't, but if you got to reconceptualize that space every, I don't know, 5 years or so, it becomes a very expensive proposition. Can you help us understand what the lifespan is and what can we look forward to?
What you're saying is quite correct, and the reason that individual restaurant operators have more flexibility is because they don't have anybody in their organization called the food and beverage director. Uh, that will hurt a lot of people's feelings, but it's true. Uh, and uh, I have to say that there's a mindset in the hotel world that concepts and designs become obsolete rather quickly. Uh, and I don't agree with that. I think hotel concepts and designs do become obsolete unnecessarily uh, because uh, the people who are making those kinds of decisions have decided that because the restaurant isn't working well, something's wrong with the concept or with the design. And really, what's happening is two things. I think one is a fundamental over emphasis on what a hotel restaurant is supposed to do for a hotel, and second, uh, that the change from one concept to another or one design to another is generated by an administrative decision rather than an ability inherent in the hotel companies to reinvigorate a space or to keep a space highly active and attractive to consumers for its own intrinsic merits.
Well, look, in the old days, maybe I vividly remember when I went to culinary school that when people wanted a fabulous meal and a really good experience, you would tend to gravitate towards an iconic hotel, an iconic restaurant. Soon thereafter, everybody was checking their.
Hello.
No, no, we back. It was a little bit frozen. We were talking about the evolution of restaurants.
Yeah, we will get back Abid and Michael here in a moment. So
Here we are again.
We
yeah,
were
we're back.
disconnected there. This is the wonders of technology, but I'm glad we're back. So, Michael, continuing on our conversation with you, help us understand the thought process in creating these concepts. Obviously, you have done work around the globe. what makes these restaurants iconic and unique?
I don't think a hotel restaurant necessarily has to be iconic and uh, in order to survive. I think it has to be good. I think it has to fulfill the mission that's ascribed to it. The mission that is ascribed to a hotel restaurant is that it shouldn't lose too much money, and that it should provide a service and an amenity to the guests. And once you change that mission statement and say it has to make a lot of money, it has to bring people in from outside, it has to do this, it has to do that, and it has to do that within the creative limitations uh, that are imposed on it by hotel management, you find that it too much burden is being placed on the assignment of what a hotel restaurant is supposed to do. Uh, and so everybody wants to be the exception. Everybody wants to have a hotel restaurant that's a destination. And everybody wants to throw a lot of money at decor and concepts and changing it every so often because they didn't get it right in the first place. Uh, I think uh, I think the reason that hotels have been scrapping their fine dining restaurants primarily is because they don't get it right in the first place, and they're turning it over to name brand chefs who are either local or international in order to provide some additional marketing marquee to the hotel itself. There's nothing wrong with that, except that it's an admission of some kind of limitation within the organization of the hotel company itself.
Well, look, is there still room for quote unquote fine dining? Unless it is a special occasion restaurant type of thing, but do people really want to have the formality and spend the amount of time and money to get that experience?
I have to divide your question into whether you're referring to fine dining generally or hotels in specific. The people who say that fine dining is dead uh, are the same, are echoing the same people who 20 years ago said fine dining is dead. And when I first started in this business, fine dining was dead, and that was a long time ago. Uh, I don't believe fine dining is dead, and I don't believe it's ever going away. Uh, the issue with fine dining is its definition. Uh, you don't have to have double tablecloths. You don't have to have fine silver. You don't have to have waiters and maitre d's in tuxedos and captains in formal outfits. And you certainly don't need name tags. So uh, if you define the context of what fine dining is without even saying anything about the food, if you change the context of what fine dining means to people today, then it's by no means dead. Uh, you can get very good food and spend a lot of money in places that today are informal and relaxed. Uh, we used to say about hotel restaurants that if the loudest noise you could hear in a hotel restaurant was the whoosh of the air conditioner, you knew the restaurant was in trouble. Uh, and people don't want to dine in those kinds of environments today because they're not fun. Um, and fun is a major component of the experience of dining, whether it's cheap or expensive. And as long as you can inject uh, a sense of experience and fun and awe, and as long as you can create memorable experiences, uh, you don't need all the trappings of fine dining. You need the experience and the food.
Well, fair enough. I mean, look, the empty restaurants are always a deterrent for people to go there. So it's sort of like the people bring people into the restaurant, and to your point, if you can only hear the air conditioning duct spitting out air into the restaurant, that is definitely trouble. Let me head you over to Sam, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Michael, Sam.
Michael, I really enjoy our discussion. There's lots of lot of wisdom you are sharing here. But if we're looking at towards the future, where do you see the direction of dining, if you will, whether we call it fine dining, or where do you see it going from now on? You mentioned that it's more kind of relaxed and you're creating memorable experiences for the customer. But what else would you see down the path?
Well, the 2 year pause that COVID inflicted upon us was extremely costly to the food and beverage world. But it also gave technological people a lot of time to think and tinker. And the result of that thinking and tinkering is a whole new range of technological services that didn't exist or were just beginning to emerge before COVID. And they're now happening all at once. Somebody opened the door and look what came through. That's changing habits very rapidly, and everybody is running to catch up. The notion of 15-minute delivery of your groceries suggests that as long as people are willing to lose billions of dollars in experimenting on how that works, suggests that if I'm hungry and I want to go out on the spur of the moment, and then I say to myself, well, I can get my groceries in 15 minutes, or I can get prepared food from my supermarket in 15 minutes. That's faster than Grubhub can deliver food to me. So there's now this tug between the experience of getting serviced at home and the desire to be out among people. And that's a battle that's going to take place, that's going to affect the food business profoundly. And it's going to affect the food business profoundly, not only where meals are consumed, but how restaurants, especially fine dining ones that we talked about before, react to the ability of people to get reasonably good quality food at home. And how can I adapt my menu and my cooking techniques and my packaging and the aesthetics that go along with it so that I can ship to you coq au vin, just take a silly example, because I need to do that to keep my restaurant in the competitive game.
Yeah. Something I have seen here in Northern Europe is these chefs that don't really have a restaurant. They just go into somebody else's facilities and use that facility as a pop-up restaurant, and they have a limited time period for putting a special promotion in order to attract that specific audience interested in his cooking. And now the trend is so strong here that you see some restaurants have given out their space for a period of, let's say, for 1 week, and you have to book like 6 months in advance in order to get that experience. You're in Brooklyn, New York. Do you see similarities in this, or is it something isolated into Europe?
I have to say that there's a lot of that going on around the world, and the genesis of this was an economic collapse in 1998 and again in 2008, when a lot of working chefs suddenly found that they didn't have restaurants because they closed. And the same was true during the pandemic. And they became freelance chefs who were taking over, in fact, spaces of restaurants that were closed for not a lot of money to run a pop-up restaurant. And that trend has accelerated again because of COVID, with a lot of chefs and fewer restaurants. The idea of this pop-up is now being industrialized with the development of virtual restaurants, uh, where virtual restaurants are their own food courts, are taking up residence in hotels uh, to provide food and beverage, not to just to the hotels, but to the surrounding neighborhood. And they come with an assortment of their own brands or a combination of name brands and their own brands. Uh, and that's changing the nature of what a pop-up restaurant is, because uh, if you have a stable of 7 brands in a location and one doesn't work, you put another one in. That's the equivalent of a pop-up. So I the you have to be very aware of what trends are merging with what other trends and how they're affecting the industry. It's really going to be quite a mishmash for the decade ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, so many things were affected because of the last 2 years. I just remember I mean, all this home delivery of restaurants were providing delivery to home of and creating special menus just that can be delivered to the residences. A place like Dubai, a restaurant that is in South Dubai, opened a ghost kitchen in North Dubai in order to serve the same menu to people in the residence, because everybody liked to dine out, but during the lockdowns, their business didn't suffer. It's just that people ate at home and the food was delivered to the houses. So very interesting things that has developed because of this 24 months that we have lived with this pandemic.
Yes, you have to create viability of at least one or two online brands that get serviced out of your kitchen, and suddenly your kitchen becomes inadequate to service the dining room. It's an interesting balancing act, uh,
Yeah.
and so what's happening is that primarily in the casual and fast food restaurant chains, is the establishment of independent ghost kitchens with no dinings in some offbeat location. I wrote about this about 10 years ago, and again, the pandemic accelerated it. Uh, at some point, the consumer may rebel against the notion of getting food from a name brand like, let's say, TGI Fridays, uh, when they know that there's no TGI Fridays within 100 miles. And sooner or later, I think this kind of um, sleight of hand uh, will catch up to the industry, and I think there'll be a bit of a reckoning, both in terms of restaurants' reputations and consumer recognition of where their food comes from.
Very interesting. Well, thank you, Michael. Abid, any final questions before we bring everyone to the conversation?
Let's bring everybody back in, but I will ask Michael the next question. Michael, new revenue streams for restaurants and hotels. Any thoughts on that? You're talking about ghost kitchens, diversity in menus, all that. But as we know, restaurants, even now, tend to be relatively thin margin business. What are some of the things that are being done to generate more revenue?
The It depends on which part of the restaurant industry you're looking at. Um, Hundreds of independent operators who hit the wall during COVID began to search for other revenue streams. Home delivery was one. Uh, Selling for delivery items within their inventory that consumers don't normally buy or can't find at their local supermarkets is another way. Um, the ability in certain areas to now deliver a bottle of wine with a takeout dinner is another revenue stream. Uh, selling your own china, glass, and silver to consumers is a revenue stream. And finally, putting your brand on products that are commercially available for delivery is a major increment of revenue. And I'm thinking for the moment of places like Grubhub. I'm sorry, places like Goldbelly, which are providing distribution and creating national brands for local restaurants. It's a very interesting state of flux. I have a late friend, recently late, but a very close, great restaurateur uh, who invented a pastrami egg roll at his Chinese-ish restaurant in New York, and he's selling thousands of them on Grubhub to people who only heard of the restaurant but happen to live in Kansas City. So,
Wow.
that's a profound, major source of major change in what the use of a brand is.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Daniel, question for you. Future disruptions. What can we look out for? Obviously, wellness and heart healthy food is big today. Is it going to remain? What other issues are coming down the pipe? Daniel, well, it seems like we've lost sound for Daniel, but let me ask that question to TJ. I hope TJ's sound is working. So, TJ, your thoughts?
I think getting back to getting back to some semblance of normal, I think is going to be the I think the closest the most imperative thing in the near future. But I think as far as what's on the horizon, um, I think health, obviously, I'll just copy what you said. Health is very important, and it will continue to be important. I still hold true to the notion that I'm not necessarily your doctor, I'm your chef, but I think it's also it falls within our realm as food service providers to think about that, right? To think about what I'm putting on the plate, portion size, using my platform a little bit to advocate for better health. I think about supply chain. We're going to need to figure that piece out. I think collectively as major consumers, right? We all are: hotels, restaurants, chefs, cooking schools. Like, we buy a lot of food. Maybe we need to look at maybe readjusting our model a little bit, to ease the supply chain. And I think overall, I just think that I think better partnerships and camaraderies across the board is important, right? I think that
Thank you.
there's a lot of competition. I think we could do a little bit better job of working together.
Thank you. Daniel, anything you would like to add to that? Future disruptors.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, loud and
Okay.
clear.
I always think there's going to be a good space for wellness and health. I think that's going to be something. I think we've learned a lot with the DoorDash. That DoorDash, I think, is good, and delivery services for a certain kind of restaurant. I think you can never achieve a 5-star dining and have that delivered and have a good experience. That's the challenge of good restaurants delivering. Can't achieve it, and it gives you a really bad impression of the restaurant, which it shouldn't, because it can never taste fantastic delivered that way. I think hotels is an interesting space where that's going. I think, hotel, as Michael was saying, they're very different. A hotel in New York and London is hard to keep a person there if you're staying for the dining experience, but the rest of Asia is nothing like that. they are destinations. You know, the Peninsula Hong Kong and the Regent Hong Kong, well now, which will be Regent, those are destinations. I think people will always have that kind of different experience over there. So that's interesting. But there's a huge gap with what Michael was saying about how can the hotels keep up with what's going on with the rest of the industry. And back to the DoorDash, you call room service, it's still 30 minutes for breakfast. They've got to change that. They've got to give people accessibility to order before they need to through an app when they're arriving from an airport. They've got to kind of tweak that to stay current because they're very behind on time.
Well said. I think the technological platforms have raised the consumer expectations
Yeah.
nth degree. All of us are looking for instantaneous gratification, and if we cannot get that, that would lead to some dissatisfaction. Michael, back to you. Talk a bit about sustainability and zero waste type of concepts. Is that a reality? Is there value behind it, or is it mostly greenwash?
It's mostly greenwash, uh, in my opinion. I think the word sustainability should be removed from everybody's vocabulary because it has absolutely no meaning, and or it has so many different meanings that it becomes self-canceling. Uh, Waste, on the other hand, is a serious and more tangible issue, uh, and it's going to become not just an economic issue but a moral issue, uh, in the sense that we are wallowing in our own waste, uh, and this I have to say began as a post World War II phenomenon, with prosperity and the ability to throw things away rather than get them repaired. I mean, when was the last time you had your toaster repaired? Uh, the answer is probably never. Uh, so it's not just food waste; it's a societal uh, propensity to throw things away because we've been brought up that way, and how that translates into real life work in the food service business is going to be a big issue, because uh, in the fast food industry, packaging has been required to change very rapidly and will continue to be so, because various states and municipalities are outlawing certain kinds of disposables. Uh, the amount of packaging waste that is created by Grubhub and people like that, uh, because of the way and meal kit people, because of the way food is packaged, is fairly shameful. So I think there's going to be in the industry a very serious introspection as to how we cut down on waste.
Well, thank you for that. TJ, to you, what are students talking about? Because this is the future generation. I can speak to it myself, watching our son talk about uh, uh, environmental issues and how focused they are. And Michael is correct. It's been a very long time since a toaster was fixed because it's a lot less expensive to toss it than trying to get it fixed. And that skill has been lost. But yet, we've gone from micro farming to consolidated co ops and mega farming. And now we're coming back to micro farming and closer production centers. Your thoughts and what are students talking to you about?
Yeah, so I I don't think that the farmer that just grows petite turnips for one particular chef or one particular group of restaurants is helping, that this is helping the cause, right? I think that I do we we're sovereign nations, are defined on how we obviously feed our citizens, and it's going to be very difficult to have these boutique farms popping up here and there, and like Michael said, using and waving the flag of sustainability. I don't know if the economy has the economy has been just entirely too global to think on that scale. I could be, if any of my students were listening right now, I might be, chased out of here with a pitchfork. But because I think it's a little bit, you know, it has been talked about now for quite some time about growing local and supporting local. And I think that if local economies thrive, that's a good thing, right? Local economies, that's a good thing for the global markets. But we still need to get a little bit. The agribusiness, I think subsidies, I think the government needs to get a little bit smarter about how it subsidizes folks, and helping out the mid-range farmer or the mid-scale size farmer. Um, and I think that's going to be, if not, then agribusiness will just be agribusiness because it's cheap, right? And that's just how capitalism works. So I just
Fair enough.
I'm just students care. And that's all I'll end with that this generation, for whatever we want to say about them, they really, really care about things, and they really think that they can be a change agent. So I think that we should allow them the opportunity to do so.
Fabulous. Hey, Sam, I have several other questions and I can talk for hours, but anything from you? And then I'll have one last question before we close the show.
Well, my interest in social media has been strong for many years, and I had the opportunity of starting to do some live streams about 5-6 years ago, and I also tried to encourage hotels to reach out to the customers with social media, because we live, after all, in a digital age. I just want to get your thoughts on, has the industry finally started to evolve? Because there's no other choice that you have to be on Instagram on Saturday morning to cook a meal for your fans, or is it something that's going to go away? Or where do you see the importance for social media for restaurants, individual restaurant, hotels? Maybe you can ask Daniel first, because you are in the front line in the media many times.
Well, firstly, no, I don't think it's going anywhere. It's only going to be stronger. We depend on influencers in the business hugely. I mean, it's become our own PR tool. I recently did an event in Doha, and gone are the days that press are there. They don't care about press. They want social media influencers because they have the reach. It's what Michael was saying as well. It's kind of interesting to see. If you've got a signature dish, a signature drink, and it's the place to go for it, you have these influencers that will go and talk about being happy in a restaurant. You see these incredible, I just saw it the other day, it was very funny, incredible pictures of people cheering the special drink, and they're happy, and it looks like life could not be any better. And then they sat the rest of the evening with just miserable faces because they got the picture, they didn't even touch the drink, it was the thing to do. So we are depending on social media. It's a huge influence on lifestyle. It's not going anywhere, and I think there's a way of using it, and I think every restaurant needs it. I think every restaurant needs to have some level of it, because we're just used to being able to have so much access. What does the menu look like? What does that dish look like? What can we order before, or know what we're going to order? So lots of dynamics there.
Michael, what do you think? Instagram was they used an expression that's the world's largest takeaway menu, Instagram, and because all the pictures that everyone was putting out and trying to encourage people to book. But do you see, Michael, also the social media having an importance, like what Daniel mentioned?
Oh, it's not going away. Everybody is quite right. And it's not just confined to restaurants. Restaurants are just one component of the consumer consumption business, and the ability to connect via social media is much more direct than trying to get an article in a newspaper or a magazine, and it happens immediately. It's more controllable. It reaches more people. And it's much easier to manipulate and when I say manipulate, I don't mean in a bad way. I mean in order to change the message. It's much easier to manipulate the message via social media than anything related to print or even Saturday morning cooking shows. So it's with us, and we're stuck with it. And I had to laugh about Daniel and Doha and influencers. Uh, it's very funny to attend pre-openings of certain restaurants in New York, with the PR firm invites 15 or 20 influencers to the same dinner, and they all take out their cameras and they all shoot the pictures of the food. Nobody eats any of it, and then they all go back and put it on their screens.
Yeah. How about you, TJ? Your students are digital native. How are they? What is their approach to standing in front of the camera and cooking a meal for their fans?
It is prolific. It is very they're their own influencers. Every club, every class has its own Instagram page. All the students, obviously. I mean, and again, we encourage the use of the phone, but it is going absolutely nowhere, right? If you didn't have a website 15 years ago, you were behind. You were behind the times. Now, if you don't have every platform on social media, you're behind, and it's just a matter of what Silicon Valley is going to put out next for for digital marketing. It's the truth. Sure. It's just not going anywhere.
Yeah,
for sure.
Good. Well, thank you, Abid. That was my 5 cents worth of discussion on social media.
Thank you. Look, we've overrun, but it would be remiss if I didn't ask this, and I'll ask this to all three of you. Very quick, one thing that the industry can do differently moving forward. Michael, if you wouldn't mind starting us out.
I do mind starting us out because I don't have an answer.
well, that is the answer, because we might not know what all do we have to look out for. But I appreciate the candor. TJ, over to you.
There is no one thing.
Yeah, I just I think, and Michael, don't get mad at me, but economic sustainability, I think, is very important. I think that wages on top of astronomical food cost. I think all those things can be figured out. I think if there's anything we've learned from what we've gone through, is that having a little bit more than 1 month's worth of cash in the bank is probably not the best strategy for sustaining your business. So I think I think accountants and I think money managers are going to be important, I think, moving forward for restaurateurs to really get in bed with and to at least employ or have access to.
Thank you. And Daniel, you get the last word.
Oh, okay. I don't get that at home, so I love it. I would just say, where are we going right? I think what I like on the trend of restaurants now, I think Michael, TJ probably will see this. I remember the fusion days in Singapore, and it was great, but I don't think I'd ever want to go back and eat fusion food again. I see, particularly in New York, this trend of going to brilliant classics like the Avra on the Greek. You're seeing from Cipriani's. I think that's a lovely kind of way forward of really going to brilliant classics, because we never tire of that, do we? And there's a lot more classics we don't have, like Korean and maybe more Japanese real classic cuisine. I think that will be interesting to see if that trend goes on, because I think people are prepared to spend really good money on brilliant ingredients. That is what we have loved for generations.
Well, fabulous conversation, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. Daniel Green, TJ Delle Donne, and Michael Whiteman. You guys have been terrific. Thanks for being with us. Over to you, Sam.
Yes, from my side, I also like to thank the panelists, Daniel, TJ, and Michael, for joining for this discussion today. I learned so much from you today also. It was a fabulous discussion. I'd also like to thank all the live viewers and also the replay viewers who will be viewing this a little bit later on. And we also will feature this episode on our podcast, Hospitality Talks. So I look forward to welcoming you again in our next episodes, and I think we'll be back again with Abid in not too far away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.